Okay, let's now look at the concept of borrowing from other Filipino languages. So, as people started writing all these textbooks, and so you would now have the need, real, concrete need of developing Filipino as a national language. So, then it became crucial to borrow from other Filipino languages because the whole concept of doing Filipino was instead of borrowing from English, right? It's maybe better to borrow from other languages of the Philippines first. So, for example, instead of using for the word wild, for example, maybe it's better not to use wild with WAYLD, but to use ligaw or mailap, or nor to use ligaw or mailap, but instead use the Visayan ilahas. For imagery, use the Cebuano kulagway. For surface, for example, in geometry, you can use the Ilocano rabaw. For body, technical body, so Cebuano lawas, and for hegemony, the Cebuano gahum. Okay. Now, let's move on to another project. And this is the Solidarity Translation Series. So, why is this important? Why is this translation series important? Because it was the first extensive effort to translate Asian texts into Filipino. So, as you may or may not know, because of that whole colonial experience in the Philippines, many Filipinos are aware of English texts, meaning texts written in English in England or the United States, right? So when people think of world literature, they're thinking of texts written in Europe or the United States, and less about Asian texts from Southeast Asia or North Asia. And so because of this, the Solidarity Translation Series is important because these texts written in Asia became more accessible to Filipinos. So until 1994, right, 63 titles were released. And among the most important of these titles are Telma Quintanar's translation of Remedyo Amantatur's Ang Daigdig ng Tao from Bahasa Indonesia to Filipino, and Babalik Ka Paglipas ng Dilim of Kontong, which is a Thai text. Okay. So again, this is from Telma Quintanar. So, according to Quintanar, in choosing which texts to translate and in translating literature from Southeast Asia, many considerations attended the work. Aesthetic features, the fidelity of the work to the experience and era of the reader, the ability to grant the reader an opportunity to broaden his or her knowledge of our neighboring countries' culture and compare those with his or her own culture. Now, in translating Yaprek, so for example, so this is the text. So, patay na ang Yaprek, or Yaprek is dead. So, there were two male servants who fought bravely over land as each protected their master's possessions, and one died, and grasping the Yaprek crushed in his hands. And the Yaprek was the symbol for the lowly people. So, that's what it was. So, let's now look at translation and ideology. And this comes from an article written by Portia Reyes and Damon Guillermo. And the title of the article was Paraphrasing Europe, Translation in Contemporary Philippine History. So, the paper studies 3 annotated translations into Filipino that have been inspired by the controversial historiographical movement called Pantayong Pananaw, which I will explain later. So, Pantayong Pananaw means from us for us. So, it's a very anti-colonialist framework, which argued for the use of national language in academic studies. So, that's what Pantayong Pananaw argues for. So, these are the texts that Reyes and Guillermo were looking at. First, they looked at Fray Gaspar de San Agustin's 1720 letter by Didina Lapar. And then, so these were the translations that they were looking at. Second, they looked at the translation of Romel Hernandez of Telesforo Canseco's 1897 account of Cavite during the Philippine Revolution. And finally, they were looking at Zu Salazar's translation of Marx and Engels's 1848 Communist Manifesto.